The house settles around me like a held breath. It's past midnight, and the only light comes from the table lamp beside my chair, casting everything else into soft shadows that seem to pulse with the rhythm of my heartbeat. Upstairs, my family sleeps the deep, trusting sleep of people who believe tomorrow will be the same as today. Elaine's breathing has found its steady pattern. The children long since surrendered to dreams of school projects and weekend plans. Down here, I sit with my secret. The photograph lies on the coffee table between my hands, its edges worn soft from years of careful handling. In it, Julian and I are 22 again, caught in a moment of pure, unguarded laughter. His arm is slung across my shoulders, both of us squinting against summer sunlight that seems to glow from the paper itself. We're standing outside his old apartment, probably heading somewhere we've long since forgotten. But what I remember is the weight of his arm, the way it felt natural there, like it belonged. I traced the edge of the photo with one finger, careful not to damage what might be the last physical proof of who I used to be. Or maybe who I always was, underneath everything that came after. The crease runs down the middle where I folded it years ago, trying to make it smaller, easier to hide. Even then, I knew this was dangerous territory. The stairs creak above me, and my body responds before my mind catches up. The photo disappears between the pages of the book beside me, some bestseller Elaine bought me for Christmas that I've never managed to finish. My hands move with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from countless other nights like this one. The book closes with a soft whisper of paper, and I lean back in my chair, forcing my breathing to slow. The creaking stops, probably just the house settling or one of the kids turning over in their sleep. But my heart continues its guilty rhythm, and I realize I'm gripping the arms of the chair like I'm bracing for impact. This is what my life has become. These stolen moments in the dark, holding evidence of a person I used to be, or wanted to be, or was too afraid to become. The wedding ring on my finger catches the lamplight, throwing tiny fragments of gold across the pages of the closed book. 23 years I've worn this ring. 23 years of playing the part, so well that sometimes I almost believe it myself. I twist the ring slowly, feeling how it moves around my finger after all these years, loose enough to slide, but not enough to fall off. It's left a permanent indent in my skin, a pale band that marks me as belonging to someone, to this life, to these choices I made when I was young and terrified and convinced that wanting Julian the way I did would ruin everything. Maybe it would have. Maybe this life I've built, this careful construction of normalcy and responsibility, is exactly what I was supposed to choose. Maybe the man in that photograph, the one with his arm around Julian like it was the most natural thing in the world, maybe he was just a phase, a moment of confusion that I was right to put away. But sitting here in the dim light, with the weight of the house pressing down around me and the photo hidden just inches from my reach, I know that's not true. That man in the photograph wasn't confused. He was the most honest version of myself I've ever been, and I buried him so deep I sometimes forget he ever existed at all. The ring continues its slow rotation around my finger, marking time like a countdown to something I can't name. Tomorrow, I'll wake up and make coffee and kiss Elaine goodbye and drive to work and come home and help with homework and pretend that this moment never happened. But tonight, in the space between one day and the next, I allow myself to remember what it felt like to be real. The morning arrives with the mechanical precision of a life lived on schedule. The alarm at 6:15, the shower while the coffee brews, the sound of Elaine moving through her own routine in the bedroom above. By 7, I'm dressed in one of 6 nearly identical suits, standing at the kitchen counter with my mug, watching our cul-de-sac wake up through the window. Our house sits in the middle of Maple Street, surrounded by others just like it. Same vinyl siding, same small front yards with their carefully maintained lawns, same driveways leading to 2-car garages. The Hendersons next door have lived there for 15 years. The Chins across the street just had their 3rd baby. I know these details because this is the kind of neighborhood where people know things about each other, where normalcy is not just expected but celebrated. The walls of our kitchen are covered with the evidence of a life well lived. School pictures of our children, Emma and David, smiling with the forced brightness that comes from sitting still too long. Family vacation photos from Disney World, the Grand Canyon. That lake house we rented 2 summers ago where David learned to fish and Emma spent the entire week reading under an umbrella. Wedding photos, anniversary dinners, birthday parties. 23 years of documented happiness, arranged in frames that Elaine dusts every Thursday. I stare at one particular photo while I finish my coffee. It was taken at Emma's high school graduation last spring. The four of us stand together on the school steps, Elaine's hand on my chest, both kids beaming with that mixture of pride and relief that comes with finishing something important. I'm smiling too, my arm around Elaine's waist, playing the part of the proud father and devoted husband. Looking at it now, I can see what others cannot. The slight tension in my shoulders, the way my smile doesn't quite reach my eyes, the careful distance I maintain even while appearing close. I've become an expert at these performances, these moments where I'm present but not entirely there. Emma bounds down the stairs, backpack slung over one shoulder, already absorbed in her phone. She's 18 now, heading to college in the fall, and I watch her with a mixture of pride and something that might be envy. She moves through the world with such certainty, such unquestioned belief in who she is and what she wants. I wonder what that feels like. David follows a few minutes later, all elbows and knees at 15, his hair sticking up in ways that defy both gravity and the efforts of any comb. He grunts a greeting, grabs a piece of toast, and disappears back upstairs to finish getting ready. Normal teenage behavior, Elaine always says, and she's right. Everything about our life falls within the acceptable range of normal. Elaine appears last, already dressed for her job at the elementary school where she's taught 3rd grade for the past 12 years. She kisses my cheek automatically, a gesture worn smooth by repetition, and pours herself coffee in the travel mug I bought her for Christmas 3 years ago. The one with the picture of our family on it. We barely speak during these morning routines. Not from any anger or resentment, but because there's simply nothing that needs to be said. The rhythm of our days has been established for so long that words have become unnecessary. She reminds me about David's soccer practice. I mentioned that I'll be late tonight because of a client meeting that doesn't actually exist. These small deceptions have become as natural as breathing. The drive to work takes me through the same streets I've traveled for 15 years. Past the high school where both kids went, where I sometimes volunteer to help with the drama club fundraisers. Past the park where I used to push them on swings when they were small, where I taught David to ride his bike, and where Emma had her first serious conversation about boys. Past the church where we attend services most Sundays, where I sit in the same pew and mouth the words to hymns I've known since childhood. My office sits in a building full of other offices, filled with other men and women living other carefully constructed lives. Insurance isn't glamorous work, but it's steady, reliable, the kind of job that provides for a family and builds a pension and earns the respect of neighbors at backyard barbecues. I'm good at it, too. Good at assessing risk, at understanding what people have to lose and how much they're willing to pay to protect it. The irony isn't lost on me. I spend my days helping people insure their lives against catastrophe, while living with the constant awareness that my own life is built on a foundation that could crumble if anyone looked too closely. During lunch, I sometimes walk past the high school football field, watching whoever happens to be practicing there. The boys move with that particular grace that comes from being young and strong and unaware of how quickly time passes. I tell myself I'm just taking a walk, getting fresh air, but I know better. I'm looking for something I can't name, some reflection of the person I used to be before I learned to hide so well. The evenings follow their own established pattern. Dinner around the table, conversation about school and work and weekend plans. Help with homework when needed, though the kids mostly handle that themselves now. Television shows that Elaine and I both enjoy enough to watch without having to really engage. Bedtime routines that have evolved as the children grew older but maintained their essential structure. And through it all, Elaine remains exactly who she's always been. Kind, patient, devoted to our family with a fierce loyalty that should make me feel grateful instead of guilty. She loves me, I know this. Has loved me since we were in college together, when she saw something in me that made her believe I was worth building a life around. She still looks at me sometimes with that same expression, as if she can't quite believe her luck in finding me. If she notices the ways I've changed over the years, the subtle distance that has crept between us, she doesn't mention it. Our physical intimacy has become practical rather than passionate, scheduled rather than spontaneous, but she seems content with that evolution. Marriage changes, she said once. People grow comfortable with each other. This is normal. But lying next to her at night, listening to her breathe, I know that what we have isn't quite what either of us deserves. She deserves to be loved completely, without reservation, by someone who doesn't have to remind himself to be present in his own life. And I deserve to know what it feels like to be myself, fully and honestly, with someone who sees me and chooses me anyway. The thought terrifies me, because it suggests that everything I've built might be built on the wrong foundation. But as I drift off to sleep, surrounded by the quiet sounds of my family's dreams, I can't shake the feeling that somewhere along the way, I stopped living my life and started simply managing it. The message arrives on a Tuesday evening, buried between work emails and a reminder about David's soccer practice. I almost delete it without reading, assuming it's another piece of digital debris that somehow made it past my spam filters. But something about the subject line stops me. Class of '02, 25-year reunion. The numbers hit me like a physical thing, a reminder of how much time has passed since I was the person I used to be. I open it while Elaine loads the dishwasher, the ordinary sounds of our evening routine providing a soundtrack to what feels like the ground shifting beneath my feet. The email is cheerful and generic, full of exclamation points and promises about reconnecting with old friends, reliving the good times, seeing how everyone turned out. There's a link to a website where people can RSVP, upload recent photos, share updates about their lives. I scroll through the message twice before I see it. The attendee list, alphabetically arranged, with little check marks next to the names of people who've already confirmed. Adams, Jennifer. Confirmed. Brooks, Michael. Confirmed. Chun, Sandra. Confirmed. I keep scrolling, my heart beginning to pick up speed for reasons I don't want to examine too closely. Martinez, Julian. Confirmed. The name sits there on my screen like a door I thought I'd locked forever, suddenly standing wide open. Julian Martinez. After 25 years, just seeing his name typed out in simple black letters makes something inside my chest flutter and tighten. I realize I'm holding my breath. Memories surface without permission, sharp and vivid as if they happened yesterday, instead of half a lifetime ago. Julian at 17, laughing at something I said while we sat on the bleachers after everyone else had gone home. The way he looked when he was thinking hard about something, his brow furrowed, one hand absently running through his dark hair. The afternoon we spent at his apartment, supposedly working on a history project, but mostly just talking about everything and nothing until the sun went down and we realized we'd been there for hours. I remember the wrestling match in his backyard that summer after graduation, both of us sweaty and breathless from the heat and the exertion. The way it started as roughhousing and ended with us lying in the grass, his arm across my chest, both of us suddenly quiet. The moment stretched too long, became something else, something I didn't have words for then and have spent years trying to forget. The weight of his arm, the sound of his breathing, the way the whole world seemed to hold still around us. When he moved away for college that fall, I told myself it was relief I felt. Relief that I wouldn't have to navigate whatever was happening between us. Wouldn't have to name the thing I felt when he looked at me a certain way or stood a little too close. I threw myself into my own college experience, met Elaine during orientation week, and convinced myself that what I felt for Julian had been nothing more than the confusion of youth, the normal experimentation that happened before people figured out who they really were. But sitting here now, staring at his name on the screen, I know I was lying to myself then just as much as I've been lying ever since. The feelings weren't confusion. They were clarity. They were the most honest thing I'd ever experienced, and I buried them because I was terrified of what they meant. Elaine asks me something about tomorrow's dinner plans, and I close the laptop so quickly it makes a sharp snapping sound. She looks over at me curiously, and I realize my hands are shaking slightly. I press them flat against the kitchen table, trying to still them, trying to look normal. For the next 3 days, I don't open the email again. I go through my routines, attend meetings, help David with his algebra homework, take Elaine to dinner at the Italian place she likes. But Julian's name sits in my inbox like a time bomb, and I catch myself thinking about him at odd moments. While I'm shaving in the morning, I wonder if he still has that scar on his chin from when he fell off his bike in 8th grade. During client calls, I find myself remembering the way he used to laugh, really laugh, with his whole body. On Friday night, after the kids have gone to their rooms and Elaine is grading papers at the kitchen table, I finally bring up the reunion. I try to sound casual, as if I just remembered it, as if it hasn't been occupying my thoughts for days. I tell her about the email, frame it as a simple trip down memory lane. She looks up from the stack of papers covered in her neat red corrections, genuinely pleased at the idea. She says it sounds fun, asks if she can come along, meet some of my old friends. The offer is innocent, generous, exactly what a supportive spouse should say. But something cold settles in my stomach at the thought of Elaine meeting Julian, of watching them shake hands while I stand there trying to pretend that seeing him again isn't unraveling something I've spent decades carefully winding tight. I tell her it would probably be boring for her, just a bunch of middle-aged people reliving old times, talking about people she's never met. I suggest she could use the weekend to catch up with her own friends, maybe drive down to see her sister. The lie comes so easily it frightens me. She seems to accept my reasoning, says it might be nice to have a quiet weekend to herself. That night, I lie awake long after she's fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling and trying to convince myself not to go. I catalog all the reasons it's a bad idea. I'm married. I have children who depend on me, a life that works, a reputation to maintain. Julian is probably married too, probably has his own family, his own careful construction of normalcy. We're not the people we were at 17 and 18. Too much time has passed. Too much has changed. But when Saturday morning comes, I find myself sitting at my computer, the reunion website open in front of me. The RSVP form is simple. Name, number of guests, dietary restrictions. There's a space for a message, for sharing what I've been up to all these years. I stare at the empty box for a long time, trying to think of how to summarize a life lived in careful performance. Instead, I skip the message and check the box that says I'll be attending alone. My finger hovers over the submit button for what feels like hours, but is probably only seconds. When I finally click it, my hands are shaking again, and I have to close the laptop and walk away before I lose my nerve and try to undo what I've just done. The confirmation email arrives immediately. Thank you for confirming your attendance. We look forward to seeing you there. The reunion is still 6 weeks away, but already I can feel something shifting inside me, some long-dormant part of myself stirring to life. I delete the confirmation email, as if that might somehow contain what I've set in motion, but I know it's too late. The door I thought I'd locked forever is now standing wide open, and Julian Martinez is waiting on the other side. The hotel ballroom pulses with the kind of nervous energy that only comes from bringing together people who haven't seen each other in decades. Everyone looks older, of course, but in ways that feel both shocking and inevitable. Gray hair, laugh lines, the subtle thickening that comes with middle age and mortgages and children who eat too much cereal. But underneath the surface changes, I can still see traces of the 17 and 18-year-olds we used to be, like ghosts haunting their own faces. I arrive 20 minutes late, hoping to slip in unnoticed, but the name tag table forces an interaction with Jennifer Adams, now Jennifer Walsh, who squeals with recognition and insists on updating me about her 3 children and her husband's dental practice. I nod and smile and make the appropriate responses while scanning the room behind her, looking for the one face that brought me here. The ballroom is decorated with our school colors, blue and gold, and blown-up yearbook photos that seem impossibly young now. There's a DJ playing hits from the late 90s and early 2000s, songs that immediately transport me back to school dances where I stood against the wall watching couples sway together, telling myself I was just shy, just selective, just waiting for the right person to come along. I drift through conversations with people whose names I have to read from their tags to remember. Mike Brooks, who played football and now sells cars. Sandra Chun, who was valedictorian and became a pediatrician just like she always said she would. They ask about my work, my family, and I give them the practiced answers I've perfected over the years. Insurance, yes, very stable. 2 children, both doing well. Married to a wonderful woman, very happy. The words feel like stones in my mouth. Then I see him. Julian stands near the far wall, talking to a small group of people I vaguely recognize. 25 years have touched him gently. His dark hair is now silver at the temples, and there are lines around his eyes that weren't there before, but he still carries himself with that same easy confidence that made him impossible to ignore in high school. He's wearing a simple dark suit that fits him well, and when he laughs at something someone says, the sound cuts through the ambient noise of the reunion like a tuning fork striking metal. Our eyes meet across the room, and everything else falls away. The chatter, the music, the careful small talk of people performing their adult selves for an audience of their former classmates. For just a moment, it's like we're 18 again, and the world is full of possibilities neither of us has the courage to name. He excuses himself from his conversation and walks toward me, and I realize I'm holding my breath. 25 years collapse into nothing as he approaches, his smile warm and familiar, and exactly the same as it was the last time I saw him. "Julian," he says, extending his hand. Then, with a laugh that makes something flutter in my chest, he adds that he supposes we're past the point where we need introductions. We shake hands, and his palm is warm and slightly rough, calloused in a way that suggests he works with his hands now. The contact lasts a beat too long, or maybe that's just my imagination. When he releases my hand, I have to resist the urge to look down at my palm, as if his touch might have left some visible mark. We start with the surface things, the safe territory of careers and geography. He tells me he's a contractor now, builds custom homes in Colorado, moved there about 10 years ago after his divorce. The word divorce hangs in the air between us, loaded with implications I'm not ready to examine. I tell him about the insurance business, about staying in town, about the house on Maple Street with its perfect lawn and 2-car garage. Neither of us mentions wives or husbands in present tense. Neither of us talks about being happy. More classmates approach, drawn by the gravitational pull of recognition and nostalgia. We get absorbed into a larger group, trading stories about teachers we hated and parties we barely remember. Julian settles into the conversation easily, making jokes that remind me why everyone always wanted to be around him in school. But every now and then, I catch him looking at me when he thinks I'm not paying attention, and something passes between us that has nothing to do with shared memories of algebra class or prom night. The evening moves in waves. Dinner is served, and we end up at the same table through what might be coincidence, but feels like fate. Julian sits 2 seats away from me, close enough that I can catch fragments of his conversations with others, far enough that we can't talk privately. I find myself watching his hands as he cuts his chicken, remembering how those same hands looked when we were teenagers, always moving, always gesturing as he talked. After dinner, there are speeches from former class officers and a slideshow of photos from our senior year. I appear in a few of the pictures, usually in the background or on the edge of a group, and seeing my 18-year-old face projected on the screen feels surreal. That boy looks so serious, so careful, so afraid of taking up too much space. I wonder what he would think of the man I've become, whether he would recognize the life I've built as his own. Julian appears in more photos, usually at the center of whatever group he's with, arms slung around friends, grinning at the camera with the unself-conscious joy of someone who belongs wherever he is. In one picture, we're both visible, standing near each other at what looks like a school assembly. We're not touching, not even particularly close, but something about our body language suggests connection, an awareness of each other that the camera happened to capture. As the formal part of the evening winds down, a smaller group gravitates toward the hotel bar. Julian appears at my elbow as I'm debating whether to call it a night, and without really deciding to, I follow him and 6 or 7 others to the dimly lit space adjacent to the ballroom. The bar is quieter, more intimate, with soft lighting and enough background noise to make conversation feel private even when you're not alone. We claim a large circular table in the corner, and I find myself sitting directly across from Julian, then beside him when someone else joins, and we have to shift to make room. The proximity is intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. His knee brushes against mine as he reaches for his drink, and I feel the contact like an electric shock. It's casual, accidental, the kind of incidental touch that happens all the time between people who are sitting close together. But my body responds as if it's the most significant thing that's happened all evening. The conversation flows around us, lubricated by alcohol and the strange intimacy that comes from being with people who knew you before you became who you are now. Stories get told that I haven't thought about in years. Mike talks about the time he got caught smoking behind the gymnasium. Sandra reminisces about the senior trip to Washington, D.C., where half the class got food poisoning. Julian tells a story about our chemistry teacher, Mr. Peterson, who used to fall asleep during his own lectures, and everyone laughs because we all remember it exactly the same way. But underneath the laughter and the shared nostalgia, I'm hyper-aware of Julian's presence beside me. The way he leans forward when he's making a point. The sound of his laugh, deeper now than it was in high school, but still unmistakably his. The scent of his cologne, something woody and clean that makes me want to lean closer without understanding why. As the night wears on, people begin to drift away. Someone has an early flight. Someone else's babysitter needs to get home. The table gradually empties until it's just Julian and me and two others, then just Julian and me. The bar is still open, but the crowd has thinned considerably, and our corner feels isolated from the rest of the room. This is when the real conversation begins. Not the careful small talk of the reunion, but something deeper, more honest. Julian tells me about his marriage, how it fell apart slowly and then all at once, how he realized he'd been trying to be someone he wasn't for so long that he'd forgotten who he actually was. He talks about the loneliness of living in a beautiful house in the mountains with no one to share it with, about work that fulfills him but doesn't fill the empty spaces. I find myself reciprocating in ways that surprise me. I don't tell him about my own marriage explicitly, but I talk about the feeling of being disconnected from my own life, of going through the motions without really being present. I mention the weight of expectations, of trying to live up to an image of success that never quite feels like it fits. We're being careful with our words, dancing around the edges of larger truths, but something is building between us. A recognition, maybe, or a remembering of something that was always there but never acknowledged. The way his eyes stay focused on mine when I talk. The way I find myself leaning closer to hear him better even though the bar isn't that loud. When last call is announced, we both look surprised, as if we've lost track of time entirely. We finish our drinks and make our way toward the exit, but neither of us seems ready for the evening to end. Outside the hotel, under a streetlight that casts everything in amber, we linger in the kind of moment that feels suspended from normal time. The conversation turns more personal, more vulnerable. Julian tells me about the nights he lies awake wondering if he made the right choices, if the life he built was the one he was supposed to live or just the one that seemed expected. I hear myself admitting things I've never said out loud, about the loneliness that exists even in a crowded house, about the feeling that I'm performing my own life rather than living it. We're standing close now, closer than casual conversation requires. I can see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the way the lines around them deepen when he smiles. When he reaches out and puts his hand on my shoulder, the gesture feels both completely natural and utterly revolutionary. It's the same way he used to touch me when we were teenagers, casual and affectionate in the way that young men can be with each other before the world teaches them to be afraid. But we're not teenagers anymore, and the weight of his hand on my shoulder sends heat racing through my body in a way that has nothing to do with friendship or nostalgia. I don't pull away. I should, I know I should, but I can't make myself move. Instead, I find myself leaning slightly into the touch, and something passes between us that neither of us acknowledges, but both of us feel. The moment stretches out, balanced on the edge of something that could change everything or nothing, depending on what happens next. Then Julian's phone buzzes with a text message, and the spell is broken. He checks it, apologizes, says something about an early flight and needing to get some sleep. We exchange information, promise to stay in touch this time, and part ways with a handshake that lasts just a heartbeat too long. I watch him walk toward the hotel entrance, and only when he disappears inside do I realize I'm still standing under the streetlight, my shoulder warm where his hand rested, my heart beating like I've been running. The drive back to my own hotel room passes in a blur, and I know that something fundamental has shifted tonight, something that I can't pretend didn't happen or dismiss as nostalgia. For the first time in 25 years, I feel like I remember who I used to be. And for the first time in just as long, I wonder if it's too late to become that person again. Back in my hotel room, I stand before the bathroom mirror with my shirt unbuttoned and my tie hanging loose around my neck. The fluorescent light is harsh and unforgiving, casting shadows that make me look older than I felt just hours ago. My reflection stares back at me, and for the first time in years, I really see myself. Not the careful construction I present to the world, not the husband and father and responsible citizen, but the man underneath all those layers of performance. My hand moves almost without conscious thought to my shoulder, fingers finding the exact spot where Julian's palm rested. The fabric of my shirt is cool now, but I swear I can still feel the warmth of his touch, as if it left some invisible mark that only I can sense. I close my eyes and try to recreate the moment, the weight of his hand, the way something inside me responded to that simple contact like a tuning fork struck against metal. The memories come flooding back then, not the careful, edited versions I've allowed myself over the years, but the raw, unfiltered truth of what I felt when we were young. I remember watching Julian in ways that had nothing to do with friendship. The way my eyes would follow him across the cafeteria, tracking his movements like he was magnetic north, and I was a compass that couldn't help but point in his direction. The excuses I made to spend time with him, study sessions that turned into long conversations, pick-up basketball games where I lived for the moments when we'd collide going for the same rebound. I remember the afternoon at his apartment when we were supposedly working on that history project about World War II. We'd spread textbooks and papers across his bed because his desk wasn't big enough, and somehow we'd ended up lying side by side, propped up on our elbows, reading different sections and sharing interesting facts we discovered. The mundane intimacy of it, the way his elbow would bump against mine when he turned a page, the sound of his breathing in the quiet room. At some point, the pretense of studying had evaporated entirely. We were just talking, the way we always did, about everything and nothing. Teachers we hated, movies we wanted to see, plans for after graduation that felt both urgent and impossibly distant. The conversation had meandered to loneliness, to the feeling that no one really understood us, to the weight of expectations from parents and teachers and the general adult world. Julian had rolled onto his side, facing me, his head propped on his hand. I can still see the way the afternoon light fell across his face, highlighting the angles of his cheekbones, the dark sweep of his eyelashes. He'd said something about feeling like he was always performing, always trying to be what other people expected him to be, and I nodded because I understood exactly what he meant. That's when I'd almost said it. The truth that had been building inside me for months, maybe years. The words had been right there, balanced on the tip of my tongue like a diver preparing to leap. I love you. Not as a friend, not like a brother, but in the way that makes your chest ache and your skin feel too small for your body. In the way that makes every song on the radio sound like it was written specifically about how you feel. But I'd swallowed the words instead, turned back to the textbook, made some comment about how we should probably get back to work. Julian had stared at me for a long moment, and I'd wondered if he could see through my careful deflection, if he understood what I'd almost confessed. Then he'd rolled back onto his stomach, picked up his pencil, and the moment had passed into the category of things we would never discuss. Standing here now, 25 years later, I can finally admit what I knew even then. I hadn't pulled back because I was uncertain about my feelings. I'd pulled back because I was terrified of how certain I was, how completely and utterly sure I was that what I felt for Julian was the realest thing in my 18-year-old life. The wrestling match in his backyard comes back to me with startling clarity. It had started innocently enough, the way these things always did when we were teenagers. Some joke about who was stronger, a playful shove that escalated into a full wrestling match on the grass behind his house. We'd been sweaty and breathless from the heat and the exertion, both of us laughing and trash-talking as we grappled for advantage. But then I'd gotten him pinned, my hands on his wrists, my body pressed against his, and suddenly the laughter had died away. We'd been face to face, breathing hard, and the playfulness had transformed into something else entirely. Something electric and dangerous and impossible to ignore. His lips had been slightly parted, his eyes locked on mine, and for a heartbeat that felt like eternity, I'd thought he was going to kiss me. Instead, we'd both gone very still. The weight of the moment had settled over us like a heavy blanket, and I'd become hyper-aware of every point of contact between our bodies. His chest rising and falling beneath mine. The pulse I could feel beating in his wrist under my fingers. The way his breath felt warm against my face. Then one of us had moved, broken the spell, and we'd rolled apart, both of us sitting up and brushing grass off our clothes with studied casualness. We'd made jokes about being out of shape, complained about the heat, anything to avoid acknowledging what had just happened. But I carried the memory of that moment with me for weeks afterward, replaying it in my mind until I'd worn it smooth like a stone worried between fingers. Now, in this hotel bathroom mirror, I finally let myself acknowledge what I was too young and too frightened to understand then. I hadn't been confused about Julian. I'd been in love with him. Completely, devastatingly, hopelessly in love with him in the way that 17-year-olds fall in love, with their whole bodies and souls, and with no understanding of how to handle the intensity of what they're feeling. And I'd spent the next 25 years trying to convince myself that what I felt had been nothing more than the experimental phase that everyone goes through, the normal confusion of adolescence that gets resolved when you meet the right person of the opposite sex and settle down into the life you're supposed to live. But meeting Elaine hadn't resolved anything. It had simply provided me with a way to perform normalcy so convincingly that even I'd started to believe it most of the time. I'd thrown myself into the role of devoted boyfriend, then husband, then father, with the desperate commitment of someone trying to prove something to themselves as much as to the world. The realization is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it means that everything I've built, every choice I've made for the past 2.5 decades, has been based on a fundamental lie about who I am. But liberating because suddenly so much makes sense. The distance I've felt from my own life, the sense that I'm always performing rather than living, the way physical intimacy with Elaine has felt like something I do rather than something I need. I sink down onto the edge of the hotel bed, still staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My shirt hangs open, and I can see the pale band around my ring finger where my wedding ring usually sits. I'd taken it off before the reunion, told myself it was because I didn't want to spend the evening fielding questions about my marriage from people who were essentially strangers now. But sitting here, I understand that it was more than that. Some part of me had needed to go to that reunion as the person I used to be, not the person I'd trained myself to become. For the first time in decades, I let myself imagine what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to tell Julian how I felt when we were 18. If I'd said the words instead of swallowing them. If I'd kissed him in that moment when we were wrestling and the whole world seemed to hang suspended between what was and what could be. Would he have kissed me back? Would we have found a way to build a life together? Or would the world have been too hostile, too unforgiving for two young men trying to love each other openly? I'll never know the answers to those questions, but I can't escape the feeling that by choosing safety over truth, I've cheated not just myself, but everyone who's loved me since. Elaine deserves a husband who desires her completely, not someone who has to remind himself to be present during intimate moments. My children deserve a father who models authenticity, not performance. And Julian, wherever he is right now, deserves to know that someone loved him enough to risk everything, even if I was too young and too afraid to take that risk when it mattered. His name escapes my lips in a whisper so quiet I barely hear it myself. Julian. It feels different saying it aloud here. in this space between who I've been and who I might still become. Not the casual way I said it at the reunion, weighted with years of careful distance, but the way I used to think it when we were young, like a prayer or a secret or a promise I was too frightened to make. I say it again, slightly louder this time, testing how it sounds in this new context of honesty. Julian. The syllables feel familiar and foreign at the same time, like a language I once spoke fluently, but haven't used in so long that I have to concentrate to remember how to form the words. Outside my hotel window, the city sleeps, unaware that one of its citizens has just stopped lying to himself for the first time in a quarter-century. I know that tomorrow will bring complications I can't even begin to imagine. I'll have to return to my life on Maple Street, to Elaine and the children and all the careful structures I've built around the person I thought I was supposed to be. But tonight, in this anonymous hotel room, I finally let myself be the person I've always been underneath all the performance. Tonight, I finally admit that I am a man who has spent his entire adult life in love with someone he was too afraid to claim, and that everything else has been elaborate scaffolding built around that one fundamental truth. The drive home from the reunion takes 3 hours, but it feels like I crossed some invisible threshold between who I was when I left and who I am when I pull into the driveway on Maple Street. The house looks exactly the same as it did when I departed 2 days ago, but I see it differently now, as if someone has adjusted the focus on a camera I didn't realize was blurry. Elaine meets me at the front door, still in her pajamas, even though it's nearly noon on Sunday. She kisses my cheek in the automatic way that married couples do, asks how the reunion was, whether I had a good time. I tell her it was fine, that it was nice to see everyone, that most people looked exactly like you'd expect after 25 years. The words feel hollow in my mouth, a pale shadow of the earthquake that happened in that hotel room just hours before. The children are at their usual weekend activities. Emma is at her friend Jessica's house working on some college preparation project, and David has soccer practice until 3. The house feels too quiet, too small, like it might not be able to contain what I've brought back with me. I move through the familiar spaces with a strange sense of displacement, as if I'm visiting a museum of my own life rather than living in it. Over the next few days, I try to slip back into the rhythm of our routine, but something has fundamentally shifted. I catch myself staring at Elaine across the dinner table, studying her face as if seeing it for the first time. She's a beautiful woman, objectively speaking. Kind eyes, warm smile, the sort of gentle attractiveness that ages well and speaks to inner goodness. I've always known I was lucky to be married to someone so universally liked and respected. What I'm finally admitting to myself is that luck and love are not the same thing. I become quieter, more distracted. During conversations about weekend plans or David's upcoming parent-teacher conferences, I find my mind wandering to moments from the reunion that I replay like favorite songs. The way Julian looked when he laughed, the weight of his hand on my shoulder, the feeling that for those few hours, I was talking to someone who might actually see me. Elaine notices, of course. She's noticed things about me for 23 years, has become an expert in the subtle changes of my moods and habits. At first, she attributes it to normal post-reunion melancholy, the kind of reflective sadness that can come from seeing how much time has passed. She gives me space, doesn't push for details I don't seem ready to share. But as the days turn into a week, then 2 weeks, my distraction becomes more pronounced. I forget to pick up David from practice one afternoon, something that has never happened in all the years I've been driving him to and from activities. I miss a client call that I've had scheduled for weeks. During family movie night, I sit on the couch physically present but mentally elsewhere, and when Emma asks me a direct question about the plot, I realize I haven't been following the story at all. It's a Tuesday evening when everything finally comes to a head. The children have finished their homework and gone to their rooms, David to play video games and Emma to video chat with college friends who've already started their freshman year. Elaine and I are alone in the kitchen, me pretending to read the newspaper while she grades spelling tests at the table where we've eaten thousands of meals together. She sets down her red pen and looks at me with the kind of direct attention that makes it impossible to hide. I know this look. It's the same one she uses when one of the children is trying to avoid admitting they've done something wrong. Patient but implacable, loving but uncompromising in its demand for honesty. She says my name quietly, not a question but a statement that requires a response. When I look up from the newspaper, I can see in her eyes that she's been thinking about this conversation for days, maybe weeks, gathering the courage to ask questions she's not sure she wants answered. She tells me that something has changed since the reunion, that I've been somewhere else even when I'm sitting right here in this kitchen. She asks if something happened, if I learned something that upset me, if someone said something that brought back difficult memories. Her voice is careful, gentle, the tone she uses when she's trying to coax information from a student who's struggling with something at home. I try to deflect at first. I tell her I'm just tired, that work has been stressful, that seeing everyone from high school made me reflective about how quickly time passes. These aren't lies, exactly, but they're not the truth either, and we both know it. She listens to my explanations with the patience of someone who's heard these kinds of half-truths before and has learned to wait for what's really underneath them. But she doesn't let it go. Not this time. She leans forward across the table, and I can see something in her expression that I've rarely seen before. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of determined clarity that suggests she's reached some internal decision about how long she's willing to wait for me to trust her with whatever is consuming me. She says she's been married to me for over 20 years, that she knows when I'm holding something back, and that she's tired of pretending she doesn't notice. She says she deserves better than being shut out of whatever crisis I'm having. That marriage is supposed to mean you don't have to carry the heavy things alone. The words hang between us in the familiar kitchen, surrounded by the accumulated evidence of our shared life. The refrigerator covered with soccer schedules and school photos. The coffee maker we bought together when we were newlyweds, still convinced that every small decision was an adventure we were undertaking as a team. The table where we've celebrated birthdays and helped with homework and had countless conversations about ordinary things that seemed important because we were having them together. Her gaze pins me in place, and I realize that this moment has been building for years, maybe decades. All the careful distance I've maintained, all the ways I've been present but not fully there, all the times I've responded to her love with gratitude instead of passion. She's been waiting for me to trust her enough to be honest about whatever has been keeping me from being completely hers, and she's finally run out of patience for my evasions. So I tell her, not everything, not Julian's name or the specific memories that have been haunting me since the reunion, but enough. I tell her about the feelings I've spent my entire adult life trying to bury, about the parts of myself I've never felt safe enough to acknowledge. I tell her that the reunion forced me to confront things I thought I'd left behind, truths about who I am that I've been too frightened to examine. The words come haltingly at first, then faster, as if some dam has finally broken inside me. I don't tell her about wrestling matches or almost confessions or the way Julian's touch still burns on my shoulder weeks later. But I tell her about the loneliness that exists even in a house full of people who love me, about the feeling that I've been performing my own life rather than living it, about the growing certainty that I haven't been fair to her, or to myself, or to anyone who's tried to love the person I've pretended to be. When I finally stop talking, the kitchen is utterly silent. Elaine sits perfectly still across from me, her hands folded on the table, her face pale but composed. I can see her processing what I've told her, trying to fit these new pieces of information into the picture she's carried of our marriage, of me, of the life we've built together. Finally, she speaks. Her voice is quiet but steady when she asks the question I've been dreading since I walked back into this house, carrying the truth like a time bomb. She asks if I love her. The question deserves an honest answer, and for perhaps the first time in our marriage, I give her one. I tell her that I care for her deeply, that I respect and admire her, that I'm grateful for everything she's given me and everything we've built together. I tell her she's been a wonderful wife and mother, that she deserves every happiness in the world. But I also tell her that I don't love her the way she deserves to be loved, not with the passion and complete devotion that she's given me all these years. I tell her that she deserves to be someone's everything, not someone's careful compromise with conventional expectations. The tears come then, for both of us. Hers are quiet, dignified, the tears of someone who has suspected this truth for longer than she's been willing to admit, but hoped she was wrong. Mine are messy, full of guilt and relief, and the strange grief that comes with finally acknowledging how much damage you've done by trying to be someone you're not. But underneath the tears, there's also something unexpected, a kind of calm that I haven't felt in years, maybe decades. The terrible weight of the secret is finally shared, the careful performance finally acknowledged as performance. For the first time in my adult life, I've told another human being the truth about who I am, and somehow we're both still breathing. We sit there in our kitchen, surrounded by the life we've built on a foundation that we both now understand was never quite solid, and something between us shifts. Not toward reconciliation exactly, but toward a kind of honest recognition of what we've actually been to each other all these years. Partners in creating something that looked like love from the outside, but was really mutual protection from a world that demanded we fit into shapes that never quite fit. It's not forgiveness, not yet. It's not absolution or easy answers or a clear path forward. But it's truth, finally spoken aloud in this house, where we've been so careful to speak only the acceptable things. And truth, I'm discovering, has its own kind of gravity, its own way of reshaping everything around it until what seemed impossible begins to feel like the only way forward. The house settles into a different kind of silence now. Not the heavy, suffocating quiet of secrets held too long, but something lighter, more honest. 3 weeks have passed since that evening in the kitchen when I finally spoke the truth aloud, and the walls themselves seem to breathe differently now, as if they too are relieved to no longer hold the weight of what went unspoken for so many years. Elaine took the children to her mother's house for the weekend, a trip planned with the careful consideration that has marked all our conversations since that night. We've been gentle with each other, moving through the house like people recovering from the same injury, understanding that healing requires both space and time. She kissed my forehead before she left, a gesture that felt like both goodbye and blessing, and told me to use the quiet to figure out what comes next. Now I sit alone at the kitchen table where we've shared so many meals, so many conversations, so many carefully constructed moments of domestic normalcy. The morning light streams through the windows, illuminating 2 gold wedding rings that rest side by side on the polished wood surface. Mine and hers, removed not in anger but in acknowledgement that some promises, no matter how sincerely made, cannot be kept forever. The rings catch the sunlight and throw tiny fragments of light across the table's surface, 23 years of marriage reflected in those simple bands of metal. I pick up mine and turn it slowly between my fingers, feeling the weight of it, the way it's worn smooth from years of fidgeting with it during difficult conversations or moments when I had to remind myself who I was supposed to be. There will be lawyers eventually, and difficult conversations with Emma and David about why their parents are choosing to love each other differently than they have before. There will be explanations to neighbors and friends, the careful navigation of a divorce in a community where our marriage has been seen as particularly stable and enduring. But those complications belong to the future. Today, there is only this quiet and the strange peace that comes from finally being honest about the shape of my own heart. Beside the rings sits a half-written letter, 3 pages of crossed-out sentences and false starts. The address at the top is clear enough: Julian Martinez, followed by the Colorado address I found with the kind of internet search that would have been impossible 25 years ago. But the words below that simple heading have proven almost impossible to write. How do you reach across a quarter-century of silence to tell someone that they were the most honest thing in your life when you were too young and too frightened to know what that meant? How do you explain that their laugh has haunted your dreams, that their touch burned on your shoulder for weeks after a reunion you almost didn't attend? How do you apologize for the love you were too cowardly to claim when claiming it might have changed everything? I've started the letter dozens of times. Sometimes formal, sometimes casual, sometimes desperate with the kind of raw honesty that feels dangerous even now. But every attempt feels insufficient. too small to contain what I need to say, or too large to risk sending into the world where it might be read by someone who has moved on completely from whatever we might have been to each other. The latest draft begins simply. Julian, I hope you remember me. I know it's been many years since we've spoken, but I wanted you to know that seeing you at the reunion changed something fundamental in my life. The rest trails off into uncertainty, my handwriting growing smaller and more hesitant as I try to find words for feelings I'm only now learning to name. Outside the kitchen window, the neighborhood continues its weekend rhythm. The Hendersons are washing their car in their driveway, working together with the easy coordination of people who've been married even longer than Elaine and I have been. The Chin's baby is crying, a sound that carries through the morning air and reminds me of when Emma and David were small enough to need me in simple, uncomplicated ways. This street, this house, this entire life I've built here suddenly feels both precious and impossible. I love this place, these people, this version of stability I've created. But I also understand now that love isn't always enough to sustain a life that requires you to be someone you're not. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is admit that the love you're capable of giving isn't the love the other person deserves to receive. I take a sip of coffee from the mug Emma gave me last Father's Day, the one that says, "World's Greatest Dad," in letters that have faded slightly from too many trips through the dishwasher. The irony isn't lost on me. I have been a good father, I think, present and involved and committed to giving my children everything I never had. But I've also been a father who taught them, through my own example, that performance and authenticity are the same thing. I hope they're young enough, flexible enough, to learn from my mistakes rather than repeat them. The letter sits before me, unfinished and uncertain. I could send it and risk everything for the possibility of something real. I could tear it up and continue living the life I've built, albeit more honestly now that Elaine and I both understand its actual foundations. I could write a different letter, one that simply thanks Julian for his friendship years ago without admitting how that friendship shaped every day that followed. For the first time in my adult life, I don't know what I'm going to do. But instead of terrifying me, this uncertainty feels like freedom. The careful plan I've been following for decades has led me to this kitchen table, to these rings, to this half-written letter, and the recognition that everything I thought I knew about my own life was incomplete. I lean back in the chair and take a deep breath, one that seems to fill spaces in my chest that have been compressed for years. The air tastes different when you're not holding your breath, when you're not constantly braced against the possibility that someone might see through your performance to who you actually are underneath. The morning stretches ahead of me, empty and full of possibility in equal measure. I have decisions to make, conversations to have, a future to construct from the pieces of truth I've finally gathered the courage to examine. But for now, there is just this silence, these rings, this letter, and the strange lightness that comes from finally setting down a weight you didn't realize you'd been carrying. Outside, the world continues its weekend pace, unaware that in this small house on Maple Street, a 43-year-old man is finally learning what it feels like to breathe without holding back. The letter waits, patient as possibility itself, and for the first time in decades, I don't know what will happen next. And somehow, that unknown feels like the most honest thing I've ever allowed myself to face.